I'm the EALTA webinar coordinator and a researcher at the British Council. So I'd just like to welcome you to our EALTA webinar this afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. If you're new to EALTA by any chance, it's the European Association for Language Testing and Assessment. And EALTA is an independent organisation that promotes knowledge of language assessment and good practice in language assessment in Europe and around the world. So check the website and remember, if you want, it's all free and become the events. So this is a series of free webinars. We're back after a little pause during COVID. We do various topics of interest to the language community and wider applied linguistics community. So far, we've had lots of topics based on the interests of EALTA members, from things like statistics through to the CFR, fluency in speaking, and many, many other things as well. Today's topic is going to be about online standard setting. So what we'll do is our guest speaker, Harry, today will give a talk. We're thinking probably about 40-45 minutes, and then about 10 minutes for questions. So for questions, you can use the chat function at any time and put your questions into the chat, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of Harry's talk. Also, later on, if you want to turn on your camera, this will also be possible, and you can ask in person. We're using this as a regular Teams meeting. So again, I do like to emphasize that please turn off your camera and your microphone so as not to interrupt the flow of today's proceedings. We are recording this webinar that will go up on the EALTA website later, so please bear that in mind as well. So that's the preamble. So I'd just like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Charalambos Kollias, or Harry as we know him. So Harry is a research director, psychometrician at the National Foundation for Educational Research, and he directs or works on several international projects with responsibilities ranging from overseeing and conducting analysis of scale construction and international large-scale survey data to evaluating international policy linking workshops. So Harry has over 30 years experience in educational language assessment fields. He's got a PhD in language testing, which is on virtual standard setting from Lancaster University. He's got extensive experience in conducting standard setting alignment workshops, aligning test instruments to international local assessment and competency workshops, frameworks, including lots of work. He has a long history of doing work with EALTA as well, but I'll let him tell you more about some of those. So today, Harry's talk is called Virtual Standard Setting, the Benefits, the Challenges, and the Way Forward. So that's enough from me. Thank you for joining us today, Harry, and over to you to start when you're ready.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're based. My name's Charalambos Kollias, just call me Harry, and I'm going to be talking about virtual standard setting, in particular, the benefits, the challenges, and the way forward. If it does go forward. So let's begin with what standard setting is. Well, it's a decision-making process of setting cut scores that point on a scale that usually separates students into at least two categories, pass or fail. Standard setting usually entails recruiting a group of subject matter experts, our judges, getting them to go through a number of preset activities to facilitate their decision-making process so as to recommend one or more cut scores. However, a standard setting workshop usually requires a lot of resources, specifically financial costs such as travel, accommodation, food and venue, could accumulate into tens of thousands of dollars or pounds. As a result, cut score workshops are not being conducted, or even worse, they're not being replicated. Now, many of you have probably followed my presentation since 2017, the first one being at the EALTA CFR SIG and 2018 at the EALTA annual conference. I referred back then to the sea of virtual standard setting. At the time, I referred it to as a calm sea with both charted and uncharted waters, alluding to the fact that we knew some things about virtual standard setting, but not much. Well, let's have a look. Let's see our charted waters back then. This is what we knew up until 2014. There were few empirical studies. Virtual standard setting was feasible in a series of smaller sessions. You know, there were 2-hour sessions, 3-hour sessions. It was feasible in asynchronous environments. I mean, sometimes, you know, it's like you tell the judges, come back next week, do your rating in it. It was also done in combined asynchronous and synchronous environments. And it was also done through different communication media, emails, audio conferencing, or a combination of audio and video. And we also had results comparable with face-to-face. We still had uncharted waters. I mean, one of the things was in a synchronous environment could it be done, but approximately here we are 4.5 years later, and our having experienced a global pandemic, virtual standard setting has become common practice. We have entered the virtual realm and have been conducting virtual standard setting out of necessity. The technophiles are loving it. The technophobes are dreading it. We have entered the virtual standard setting matrix. And why not? Well, for starters, logistics. No more travel, food and accommodation expenses. We can now recruit people from all over the globe, time difference permitting. Our pool of judges got extremely wider as no traveling is involved. No judges ever missing more time than needed from their other responsibilities. No more than ever are judges willing to participate, and we can do it from the comforts of our own home. We once met in person to set cut scores. Now we can do it online. However, we still face the academic challenge of choosing the appropriate method for our cut score study. What should we choose for our test-centered method? One of the modified Angoff variants, the benchmark method, the ID matching method? How about for examinee-centered methods, basket method, the contrasting group method? It's no longer the what we need to think about, but the how. Many organizations have created their own virtual standard setting platforms. Here's ETS back in 2009 with their virtual workshop using the modified Angoff method to set virtual math cut scores. This is probably one of the first virtual platforms, considering it was 13 years ago. I wasn't familiar that it was actually being done back then until I read the article. Now, here's another example of a more recent one. This is ACER's online platform for the bookmark method. And believe it or not, this year ACER is one of the 4 finalists in this year's e-assessment awards for their platform. Now, there are other platforms in circulation. However, I have not seen pictures of them yet. I've heard of them. Now, before we can discuss how to conduct a virtual workshop, let me introduce my PhD research done at Lancaster University. Well, back in 2014, pre-COVID, I decided to explore the virtual environment and investigate whether cut scores in a synchronous virtual environment would be reliable, valid, and comparable. I wanted to compare and contrast two virtual medium, the audio medium and the video medium, in a synchronous environment, one lasting approximately 6.5 hours. To my knowledge, it hadn't been done. So I recruited 45 judges. I divided them into 4 virtual panels. I used 2 equated tests aiming at the B1 level of the Common European Framework of Reference, the CFR in other words. Each group was to undergo 2 virtual sessions, one in the audio medium only and one in the video medium. So I used a counterbalance research design where if one group started its first session in the audio medium with Form A, then its next session would be in the video medium with Form B, and vice versa, as you can see. We went through the normal CFR alignment process in accordance with the 2009 CFR manual in each session. In the orientation stage, judges underwent CFR descriptor familiarization activities, followed by familiarization with the test instrument. In the training method stage, I trained them in the yes, no, and off method. Then we moved to round 1, followed by a 1-hour discussion, then round 2, and then finally round 3. The platform I selected to conduct the virtual sessions allowed me to choose between audio only and audio video, which we'll call the video medium, while keeping everything else constant. Both images come from 2 virtual sessions from the same panel. The one on the left was the audio one, while the one on the right was from the video session. The only difference is cameras on, cameras off. I also used another virtual platform for judges to complete their familiarization activities, to enter their ratings, and to administer surveys. The platform allowed me to download the judges' data and to process it quickly. This saved time and helped me when we held our 1-hour discussion between round 1 and round 2. The platform also allowed me to collect round 3 judgments, where I used the extended ANGOF method, in which judges entered a final score out of the 45 item test. In other words, the maximum number of items on the test instrument. Here's an example of the normative feedback given to one of the virtual panels. All I had to do was just download it. I had the answers. This was a panel with 9 judges. Now let me describe my data collection. My data collection consisted of 3 sources. I collected the judge ratings for each round. Round 1 and 2 was dichotomous. Round 3 was 1 score out of 45. I also collected survey responses. When judges express some type of disagreement, whether they put strongly disagree or slightly disagree, I asked them to provide a rationale for that. To tell you the truth, I asked everybody to provide a rationale when they could. Now, the question was, how do you evaluate not only a standard setting workshop, but in terms of one done in a virtual environment? Which, fortunately for me, I used a framework based on 2 different frameworks, but firstly based on Keynes' validity framework and based on Hamilton and Petonian's standard setting evaluation elements framework. On the left-hand side is the procedural evidence, where you've got the write-up, you've got, well, in the write-up, you'll actually see how explicit we were, how practical it was, and you're getting the judges' survey responses. Now, from a psychometric point of view, we're interested in the internal aspect, consistency within the method. In other words, precision of cut scores, inter-judge consistency, inter-judge consistency, decision consistency, and there was no external in this case. coming to data analysis, here's how I analyze the data. Well, for quantitative, I use classical test theory. We'll come to that in a minute. And because I love using RASH, I also use RASH measurement theory. Now, fortunately, if we go back to Hamilton and Petoniak's framework for internal validity, consistency within the method, I use what was in the 2009 manual, the internal check. For intra-judge consistency, I use Feli's MPI as well as correlations. For inter-judge consistency, I use ICCs, Cronbach's alpha. And decision consistency and accuracy, I use the Livingston-Lewis method as well as the standard error method. However, now, some of you may remember this, I think it was 2019 at the CFR SIG, where I was discussing the resources, the CFR resources. And apologies, I know there's a new resource out. I haven't had the luxury of time to go through it yet. I'm not sure whether or not they give guidance on RASH and IRT procedures for standard setting. But at the time, apart from what was just released last week, if I'm not mistaken, there's no guidance on RASH or IRT procedures. There's no framework for evaluating it. No framework for evaluating cut scores set through RASH or IRT. No framework for evaluating intra-judge, twice, that should say intra-judge, apologies, within the RASH model. And I remember what Feli said back in 2004 in the supplement. The basic flaw of many applications of IRT modeling in language testing especially is that there's not enough evidence provided about the model data fit, which makes the findings of these studies more or less questionable. Fortunately, several standard setting research have used RASH to evaluate judge ratings. And also from other studies, there is a way to see the internal validity, either through IRT or RASH measurement theory. On the individual level, we can look at the fit statistics, we can look at correlations, we can look at observed versus expected, and work out what Lineker calls a RASH kappa index, if I'm not mistaken. At the group level, we have the separation indices, we have a chi-square statistic, and again, we have the RASH kappa index. So I'm ready, I'm fine. I've decided that I've got a framework for my internal validity, both CTT framework, both RMT framework. Now, my measurement model, I said, okay, I'm going to use RASH, and I need to think about this a bit more, because what I need to do is make sure that all the groups are on the same scale, because I'm using 4 different groups twice, 2 sessions per group. Now I've got to make all these 8 cut scores on the same scale. So obviously I chose the many-facet RASH measurement model. I had 2 models, one for the yes and no, and one for round 3. However, I had a problem. My problem was that separate analysis will result in separate scales. For example, if you look at group 1, and let's have a look. Group 1 had a mean score of 24.6 out of 45, and their virtual cut score in logits was 0.07. Now, group 2 had a lower mean, but a higher virtual cut score in logits. That doesn't make sense. Well, it actually does, but they're not on the same scale. So I had to think about, how can I have everything on the same scale? Because if you think about it, 24.6 is not 0.07 logits. Now, this is the score table, and everything should match from test form A. And 24.3, which is somewhere here, is not 0.15 logits. So I had a problem. But I love problems, and I'll tell you why. So in the beginning, if I kept it like there's 4 different analyses, I would be comparing oranges with apples. So next best thing, I started looking around. I started reviewing the literature again to see whether any other researcher had placed multiple panels on the same latent scale. And I didn't find, which is what I actually expected, because having multiple panels is very expensive, especially if you're doing a face-to-face environment. But at the same time, I did find a lot of empirical studies using the many-facet rash measurement model. So I thought about it. I needed to make sure that I was comparing oranges with oranges, and that all my scales were fused into one. So the best way to do this is I opted to anchor the items. Now, by anchoring the items, if we now look at the laser point, okay, 24.6, this is round 1, by the way, I'll explain that later, had a virtual cut score of 0.36, 24.3, 0.33. This looks really logical. Looks like they're all on the same scale. Let's confirm. Hang on. So 24.6 somewhere here had a cut score of 0.36. That looks logical. 24.3 had a cut score of 0.33. Group 3 had 26.4 with a cut score of 0.45. And group 4 had 28.1 with a cut score of 0.73. Perfect. I was happy. Everything's on the same scale. Now, for my survey, and I'll explain why I couldn't use rash. I tried. God knows I tried. My PhD supervisor, he knows I tried. Okay, Luke knows that. So I went back to CTT. I used the Wilkins sign rank test, and when assumptions weren't met, I used the sign test. For qualitative, I also had open-ended. I just described things as they were according to medium and preference. Also for the analysis of focus groups, I had focus groups. I used the constant comparative method for the focus groups. So let's see what the results were. Give it a few seconds. I love this slide. One of my favorite ones. So for the quantitative judgments, and these are the virtual scores. Let me just use my laser again. Okay, and we're comparing the virtual cut scores. So group 1 in the audio had 0.36 and in the video had 0.27. I should say 0.27. The difference being 0.09. Group 2, and this is round 1, had 0.35 with 0.33. As you can tell, I mean, the difference was so minute, 0.02. Group 3, 0.43 with 0.55, the difference 0.12. And group 4, 0.73 to 0.28, the difference being 0.45. As you can tell, I mean, all differences, first of all, were fewer than 0.50, which Lineker says then it starts to become statistically significant. Whether it's conceptual is a different story. For group 2, look at the story that we have here. Group 1, 0.57 with 45, 12 again. Group 2, 0.50 with 0.67, we got 0.17 difference. Group 3, 0.61 with 0.75, 0.14 difference. And group 4, the difference being 0.06. I get very minute differences. And to wrap it up, the final cut scores here. Group 1, 0.57 with 0.49, 0.06 difference. Apologies, 0.08 difference. Group 2, 0.50 with 0.55, 0.05. Group 3 with 0.59. Where is group 2? 0.86. Oh, that's pretty steep. 27.27, and group 4, 0.49 with point. In a nutshell, and considering that so many comparisons made, the difference were not statistically significant, especially with their final round 3. So whether it was done in one medium or another, more or less we had the same. I mean, statistically significant. Conceptually, when it comes to who passes or not, 0.86 is not the same as 0.55, but the cut scores are comparable within rounds, okay, and across groups. Now, I also wanted to investigate whether cut scores were comparable and whether any group exhibited bias in either of the two media. Bias interactions, which I'm calling differential medium functioning, and after taking into consideration comparisons, making the adjustment. For round 1, if you think about it, it's got 28 different pairwise interactions. They were not statistically significant. And what I've done here, I've given you
Harry, are you there? We can't hear you. Okay, you're back.
And that is, yeah, and that's what happens in the virtual world. We'll talk about, am I still sharing? That's the question.
You were, you just, yep. If
now?
You share now. Yes, that's good, thanks.
Okay. And the internet was so fine. But cut a long story short, round 1, no bias. So the medium did not affect the virtual. There was no difference in the virtual cut scores, okay? And there was no bias. Oh, what is... Okay. For round 2, same story. Round 3, same story. So at the end of the day, the quantitative data gave me that virtual cut scores were reliable, comparable, and valid. And no differential medium functioning, aka bias, was observed. Survey items. Now, remember we talked about in the framework, you also want to collect the judges' perceptions. Well, there were 2 types of mini surveys within the surveys. There were perceptions and there were items on the procedure. The perception items dealt about virtual standard setting per se. The procedure items dealt with the procedure. Did they understand the directions? Could they do it? Did they have any problems? Marking, rating, whatever. Now, to give you a picture of the quantitative responses, now here's my problem, and this is why I couldn't use RASH, unfortunately. Everything was positive, more or less. 92.5% of the responses were agree or strongly agree in the audio, and 91.17% in the video. If we look at negative responses, 2.66% in the audio and 2.16% in the video. So they were really positive as far as their perceptions. Now, I mean, things would ask, you know, did the audio medium create a positive environment? The same question was asked in both sessions. Did the medium help to resolve problems? Now, as far as the procedural evidence, the ones asking whether or not they understood the task, whether they could do the task, whether they had enough time to do the task, whether they are confident in their ratings, 89.53% in the audio and 92.86 in the video, compared to 2.14% in the audio and 1.15% in the video. Overall, even the procedural data is great. So at the end of the day, quantitative and qualitative, no preference towards a specific medium for quantitative. However, again, in their open-ended answers, they express preference towards the video medium. Next thing, the focus group. Okay, so there's something wrong here. Oh no, I've already discussed that. I analyzed it through contrast comparative. And I got 5 themes: psychological aspects, interaction, technical aspects, convenience, and decision-making process. Now, I'm briefly going to go over these because I did explain them in 2018. For the psychological aspects, people found that in the audio mode, you had fewer distractions. One judge said, but when we used audio, we were not so distracted so much. We were more concentrated on what we were supposed to do, implying that video causes a distraction. Another one in the audio medium, self-awareness was another thing. I'm self-conscious that you can see everything that is happening, that you can see behind me, that I don't have the freedom to do what I want to do, as if we were only on audio. Now, there's 2 ways to interpret this. One is we can actually see what's behind them, and this has been brought up again, especially in the 2009 virtual standard setting article. Again, people were by Katz, Tunneban, and Cannon, hopefully I've pronounced all names correctly, which was probably a seminal article on virtual standard setting, where people are saying, look, you can look right back in the kitchen. Now, since then, 2009 or 2014, when this was done, what's changed is some, let's say, virtual platforms also offer the possibility of blurring the background. However, there's 2 parts to this. A, you can see what's behind me. B, I don't have the freedom to do what I want to do. Now, what are they doing? Multitasking? I'll leave that for you to decide. Okay. Interaction. That was another theme that came up. Small talk. Now, the first main difference between virtual workshops and face-to-face workshops is that there was not much small talk taking place in the virtual environment. I mean, there's no place for them to go and meet even before, because if you're face-to-face, you're going to meet someone before you get into the room. Hi, how are you? Are you a judge? Are you a facilitator? Where are you from? And then if you're in a hotel and the whole thing's happening at a hotel, you'll probably meet him during breakfast. Even the facilitator will come and say, are you part of the group? Oh, I'm part of the group. You're part of the group. And, you know, you're already meeting people, talking to people over breakfast, and the workshop hasn't even started. However, look at what this judge said. When you meet someone, you have some time to get to know them. So it becomes a bit more personal. The positive aspect of this system now, all of a sudden you're like, wait, so it's negative, is that it's more professional. On the other hand, it's less personal. So they're saying now, because we didn't have this, all of a sudden it's become more professional. Goodbye small talk. Another judge said you have fewer digressions in the virtual environment. I didn't feel that at any point our discussion went off topic, whereas this might happen in face-to-face situations. We were always on topic and very focused on what we were discussing. Now, of course, there were technical aspects. Tell you the truth, I don't know what happened. Only one person I recall, and this is 2014, had problems with the internet per se, not the platform, the internet. And And later I found out that she was using dial-up back in 2014. Now, it would freeze, the computer screen would freeze, and, and I just told them, okay, great, if it freezes, jump out, jump back in. Problem solved. Other people love the convenience. You can do it at home. You can do it in your PJs. And other judges found that it was very time-saving. You didn't have to travel back and forth to the venue. One judge said, hey, the fact that I was at home and I could do the whole thing in the comfort of my home was very convenient. I mean, I would have been exhausted if there were an equivalent workshop face-to-face. Interesting. So they found the workshop less tiring than a face-to-face one. Of course, because they can take advantage of the facilities at home. Snacks, beverages. But what about decision making? Well, judges said, and this kind of wraps up decision making for everyone. Personally, for me, it didn't. It was the empirical data that you showed us that influenced my original opinions. I think no one changed their opinion because they were able to look at someone actually saying something else. So no, I mean, even the questions in the perception surveys when I talked about decision making, or even the focus groups, no one said that either of the mediums affected the decision making process. Then we had netiquette. Now, I set rules from the onset, and I'll explain that coming up later. Okay, where you want to raise your hand, you got to raise your hand. You can use these buttons to agree, disagree. If you're going to leave for a couple of minutes, just press the step away, and it will show up as the person's not there. I mean, use the buttons. Some people liked the buttons, some people didn't like the buttons. Some people said, look, I want to, call out. I want to shout out. I want to speak at that particular minute. I don't want to be in line waiting for the other person to finish. Here's one person saying, felt that raising hand symbol was very convenient because it enabled us to speak whatever we wanted to express our opinion. And it helped the whole process, so it worked very well. Now remember, there's always some type of delay depending on where you are in sound. Now, and I'm sure by now everyone's experienced this. If everyone jumps in and talks at the same time, then that's not going to happen. I mean, no one's going to understand each other. So we had to have a turn-taking system. So qualitative, there was a preference towards the video medium. So what are the findings so far? Yes, you could do a synchronous full-day workshop, and after COVID, it's been done. Both media, whether you do it only in video or using the camera, yeah, equally appropriate. They're reliable, they're comparable, and they're valid. Neither media affects their decision-making ability, or does it hinder communication? Judges' preference towards a video. I'm going to come back to this. So what are the implications? The implications are now you've got a wider panelist selection, reduction in some of the costs, cut score studies can be conducted, replicated. Facilitators can select the virtual environment to best suit the workshop needs, meet technical and pragmatic geographical limitations. Maybe, you don't have a lot. There's some areas where the internet is not that good, switch off the cameras. It really, really depends. Caters for panelists' video reservations. Maybe some panelists do not want their face, maybe due to religion. Sure. Future research, well, there are research opportunities. My favorite is this one, and I've been pounding this from 2014. I mean, now we can have concurrent verbal reports, because if you throw everyone into different breakout rooms, provided that you have a platform that can record them, you can record these people in their own time, going through and see how they make their decisions. A comparison of audio only, video only, or face-to-face, that has been done. I've actually done it, but I'm not alluding to it today. I'm still writing that up, even though I did discuss it, I think last year. But I've done some more. I've expanded my PhD research. Discussion in the virtual environment. How exactly? I mean, what kind of discussion? Are they talking more in a standard setting environment? I know a colleague's already doing this by comparing in a test environment, face-to-face virtual, and that will be in EALTA this year. Other skills, listening, speaking, writing, yep, same colleague is doing the other skills for a PhD, other CFR levels, and other methods. Same colleague, Canistra, is also using other methods. Test security is an issue, but test security is always an issue. Maybe we can use the same protocols that we use for a normal test. But this is what I'm interested in for the next 5 minutes. Judges' preference towards the video medium. The question is, why? Why? Why do they prefer, and how can we interpret this? Maybe we need to see this through the lens of media naturalist theory. We'll have a better understanding. Now, according to Koch, humans have relied on synchronous forms of communication either through body language, facial expressions, gestures, sound, or through speech for thousands of years. Therefore, he defined media naturalness as any type of synchronous communication that can support facial expression, body language, and speech. Now, again, according to Koch, there are 5 media naturalness elements that characterize natural communication amongst participants. These are, on the left-hand side, you've got the participant's ability to share the same environment, allowing other people to see and hear. That's co-location. Or, on the right-hand side, exchange verbal cues quickly. Okay, and we're going to call that synchronicity. You're walking down the stairs, you've got a quick second to exchange some information. Number 3, employ and detect facial expressions. Number 4, detect body language. And number 5, express yourself. Express self through speech ability and your ability to listen to others. So, media naturalist theory predicts, all other factors being equal, the topic of discussion, task on hand, when the degree of naturalness of some type of task is decreased, as in e-communication, then it's likely that you will have the following: an increase in cognitive effort, an increase in communication ambiguity, and a decrease in physiological arousal. So when one of the 5 of the elements is suppressed, now see the picture on, I think I just swapped left and right before. See the picture on your left? Okay. So when one of the 5 elements is suppressed, an additional cognitive burden is placed on the participants in their attempt to decode the information they're receiving. So this increases the cognitive effort. Okay. Additionally, when people don't see each other's facial expressions, gestures, or hear each other's tone of voice, you have communication ambiguity. And participants will be disengaged if they're participating in something that doesn't seem natural. Okay. So how does that work? Let's have a look at this. Here's an example of co-location. And this was in the video environment. One of the judges said it was as natural after the initial 5 minutes as being physically in a room as we can see everyone. Another one said, look, video helps as well because you can see expressions on other people's face if they agree, if they want to say something. So employing and detecting facial expressions. This was in the audio medium. The audio helped us communicate quickly by listening to each other's thoughts and explanations. Now, one of the negative things about the audio, when you have the visual, you can see who's out there and who's listening, who's not. Whereas it was just the audio, we didn't know who was there. It was hard to keep track of who was in and out of the conversation. Increase in cognitive effort, again, because of the audio medium. It was difficult for me to concentrate on just the voice without seeing anything on the screen. It felt like I had to concentrate twice as much. Again, decrease in physiological arousal. Confused without the camera for some reason. This judge was confused that they were missing the camera and not feeling like talking most of the time. Again, increase in cognitive ambiguity in the audio medium. Sometimes I couldn't understand who was speaking. I think that it's more natural, more friendly to see who I'm talking to. But at the same time, look at the virtual environment. No, I don't think the discussion was enough. I think if they were face to face, people are more forthcoming to express their opinion. I always prefer audio because audio is faster. It's a faster type of interaction with the audio. Video lags. I'd like to add body language, body posture also contributes to understanding. And again, communicate better with someone when looking at him, since body language helps understand others better. And it was like being there, except for delays caused by unfamiliarity with platform equipment and line speed. So this could explain and why they enjoyed both platforms, but at the same time, through media naturalness theory, we can understand why they preferred the video. The way forward, well, think about the knowledge, skills, and abilities, but not only of the judges, but your facilitator. Okay, preparation is success, but the facilitators' knowledge, skills, and abilities, they need to establish the etiquette. They need to be able to multitask. By the way, they can't do it on their own. I was fortunate enough, I had a co-facilitator. They need to be thoroughly prepared, engage with judges. We'll talk about engagement in a few seconds. Have familiarity with the platform and tools, and they need to understand the nature of technical issues. In other words, okay, freezes, just jump out, jump back in. Here's an example of training. Okay, so I invited them to training sessions. I had multiple training sessions. I'm like, you can log in. These are the times. I sent them a PDF of how to use the platform. You don't need to read it, guys. But what I'm saying is I trained them, and from the onset, we talked about etiquette. For engagement, throughout, and this is in the audio mode, but I need to see if they were being engaged. I had little pop-up polls, you know, have you finished this activity? Have you finished the grammar? Have you finished the vocab? The reading, depending on, did you finish round 1? Did you finish round 2? And this is one of the things, give them a chat area. Okay, this is one of the things that I think, was it last year's EALTA, which was virtually, it was introduced for the first time, Wonder. And what I did was just, I opened up a freebie account, and this is a nice place, and supposedly I'm talking with my co-facilitator here, and judges could just visit this area during breaks or when they finish something. And you can simulate, or actually emulate, small talk environment. This is another environment. Give them a link, and you can always go back and find your judges. So what is the framework now? And something is wrong with my mouse. I love this. Oh my God. Okay, there it is. Okay, so if we take everything into account, what I would recommend is introductions. You're meeting people for the first time, switch on the video. Okay, they're doing activities, they don't need to have their video on. Okay, but you do. You as a facilitator should always be there, but microphone's muted. Feedback, everybody back on video. Training in the method, keep the video on. You want to see their faces. You want to see whether or not they're understanding the training. You're going to discuss the training. Round 1, you don't need, when they're marking, you don't need the video on. They don't need the video on. You do, because they need to know that someone is there. Always, if they've got a question, right there, mic's muted, they lift up their hand, you unmute, go ahead. And you can tell everyone, you know, switch off your speakers until you finish, if people are bothering you while with their questions. Discussion, video on. Round 2 readings, off for the judges, always on for the facilitator, and then feedback discussion on, and the same if you've got a round 3 wrap up video. Few references, and my last disclaimer, the opinions expressed in this webinar are mine, only mine, and they don't purport to reflect the opinions or views of the NFER or its members. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, we do have one or two questions, Harry, so I'll just relay some of these to you. We've had a couple in the chat so far, and we're getting some more. Donald, I don't know if you've answered this already. Donald asks, did the video sessions actually use the video beyond just the ability to see each other? Were there any visual components of the standard setting which would not be available in the audio only mode? So I guess that means kind of
I'm trying to understand. Best thing I'll do, I'll just present again. Give me a second. Let me just
You've covered that already.
What I'm saying is that the only difference was the camera, because the platform. I've got to stop the presentation. Doesn't want to stop because what the platform did was just allowed me to keep the cameras on and off. Everything else was the same, and I'll show you now while we get to the next question, because I know we're running out of time. So if we look here, oh come on, really? I got to go all the way back. Anyway, it was. I don't believe this. I got to go all the way. Anyway, while we're doing that, give me another question.
Okay.
I can multitask.
Another interesting question, I think, also from Donald was that, okay, so things have moved on. So you did this in 2014. People were not so familiar with, you know, Zoom and video conferencing, those kinds of things. Do you think that, you know, there'd be any changes, maybe Zoom fatigue could be something, you know, after COVID? I don't know, it may have worked the other way even.
Okay, actually, that's a good question. I mean, I had the same question. I did a presentation this year again at NCME, and no, absolutely not. It's not a matter. Zoom fatigue is a different story, because that's caused by having a lot of meetings online. Okay, and in most cases they're just looking at each other. Okay, and you're having meetings probably for the sake of having meetings. And if you notice now, what's happening around the world is some companies are enforcing 15-minute max on meetings. The technical reports and some people alluding to the virtual standard setting, because it has happened, right, is all these problems that were found back then, I have found as well. Okay, how do you get engaged and stuff like that? But I was fortunate enough to find a platform that allowed me to engage them. Okay, in other words, I was using polls. I mean, these are things that in the next year or two, because so much research has happened, it just hasn't been published. And other people discussing their virtual standard setting experience, I see nothing has changed. It's not a matter of fatigue anymore. It would be fatigue when you're sitting there just looking at people. That would be fatigue. You're getting them to do activities.
Okay, thanks. So very quickly, what platform, Leslie asks, what platform did you use to collect panelists' judgments?
SurveyMonkey.
Okay.
Just survey platform.
Good, no, that works. Okay, Christopher asks, okay, one of the roles of the facilitator is to direct people back to the descriptors, which are the focus. So do you think you can still do this in a virtual context as opposed to face-to-face?
Of course. And I did do this in a virtual context. And when we're doing the standardization, in the beginning of the training on the descriptors, I actually sent them the descriptors and I had highlighted the words that I think make the case. And we went over the ones that were kind of like problematic. I think this would be a B2. This is a thing. And I'll explain to them why it is a B1.
Okay. One more quick one. Any thoughts on the ideal number of people on your panel? Does it differ from a face-to-face panel?
Well, my panels were from 9 to 13. Okay, I mean, sometimes, you know, usually according to the literature, you're saying anywhere from 12 to 15. It really depends on the platform you're using. I mean, as you can see here on the right-hand side, okay, these are 3, 6, 9, 12. Okay, this was a panel with 12. And you will see that sometimes there's a 2 or Con, by the way, that you'll see the only name that I've allowed in the participants, that was my IT specialist. I had an IT 24/7 when I was doing this. Okay. They need to see each other, I mean, when they're discussing. Or I would get rid of the left-hand side and make the video bigger. So 12, I would go with, it doesn't matter, 12 to 15. Even 9 worked for me. And that was out of necessity. Someone cancelled the last minute.
Okay. Another, maybe one last practical question. What about the length of the sessions?
Mine was 6.5 hours, okay, and there were breaks, little breaks, and even an hour break. Technically, there would probably be, a normal session would be a 9 to 5, right, with an hour break and little mini breaks. What I see is people they get anxious in the virtual environment as facilitators, and they might skip a few breaks. That's a no-no. And fortunately, like if I was a panelist, say, hey, break time, I would tell them that. Okay, so 8 hours, you might be pushing it, It's always, whether it's face-to-face or not, I'd rather have an extra day added to the end and not push them within the 8 hours. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, like if it would be better to take it a little bit slower. Someone has a problem. Your IT guy can't fix it. Look at me. I mean, I was kicked out for some odd reason. I'm back.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Would there be a validity argument to have virtual standards to make sure that the judges can participate from? Sorry? What's the rest say? I can't.
From various faraway regions. So should we be including people far away? Is that part of our validity argument for the standard set?
Well, technically, when you invite people, I mean, like I've been to different standard settings as a judge, and I was like, at the time I was living in Greece. I was from Greece. Other people were from Spain. Well, the only problem you will have in a virtual setting, unlike the face-to-face where everyone's in real time, okay, is time difference. So you might want to do 2 panels, one for the south, one for the north, okay, and that would be even better. But yes, you do want to invite people from far away places. Why not? It's much cheaper.
Okay.
About the thesis, guys, at the moment, I had some very sensitive information in there. So the thesis has been locked. I've taken this information out, and I'm hopefully in the last editions of the book I'm writing with Peter Lang, hopefully that will be released. Otherwise, I expect next year, because I've told people that this needs to be released, the sensitive information to make public by the organization. I'm still waiting for that. But you've got my presentations at the EALTA resources, and hopefully my book will be out by the end of the year.
Excellent. Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. We had another question from Sun, who asked about different ways of kind of making the process as kind of valid and reliable as possible. I reckon that question would probably take about another hour to answer. So sure. I'm afraid we'll miss that one out. Thank you to everybody who joined in today, and thanks for all your questions. If you got any feedback or you want to know anything else, you just send me an email on that. This webinar should be up on the EALTA website very soon. Now we do have a section for webinars on the website. We've been waiting for it for years. It is there now, so please do check it out. And we'll hope to have another webinar sometime later this year on another topic to be confirmed. So thank you, Harry, very much for a great talk today.
Thank you, everyone. It was my pleasure. Okay.
And thanks to everybody who joined. And we'll see you again very soon, I hope. Goodbye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Bye.